Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. It is July 8th, 2023. I am your host, Popeye, and tonight I am joined by my good friend, my brother from another mother, and my frequent guest co-host here on Rabbit Hole Radio and on my old broadcast, Down the Rabbit Hole with Popeye, Mr. Steve Stars. Welcome
Well,
back, Steve.
hello. Yeah, well, hello, Popeye. Glad to be back with you here, and just a great time that we always have on the shows here. And I'm ready to rock with it. We got some good stuff coming up, and we're going to be talking about some. I mean, these are not uninteresting times, are they? I mean, we're on the razor's edge of all kinds of things happening, friends, and we'll get into it, right, Popeye?
Yes, we will. And I want to give you a big thank you really quick because the listeners may not know this. The KGRA listeners may not know, but the listeners over on Rumble will. Steve and I did 2 streams in regards to the missing Titan submersible. And both streams, the first one we touched on the Titanic conspiracy a bit. The second one we went into detail. We ended up, I think it was like 4 or 4.5 hours or something like that. So I
Yeah.
want to thank you, Steve, for taking your time to do those extra streams. And I urge the listeners to go over to my Rumble channel, Rabbit Hole Radio, and listen to them. Steve and I had covered things in the beginning. And then at the end of all things, at the end of the week, we went over everything, and we went into a rather in-depth dive or redive, I should say, into the Titanic conspiracy. So, and I mean, Steve and I have done shows here on KGRA on it in the past, so you could go in the archives and follow, find those and listen to that show too. And we'll do more stuff in the future, but you should go check those out. Anyway, I want to thank you, Steve, for giving me I think it was like 8.5, 9 hours of your time in total over the course of 2 days. So
It was pretty good. We had a lot of clips and everything like that, and of course, we do appreciate all the listeners. If you can type in a question or something like that, or contact, I suppose we can take those calls or at least questions from people listening. And you're out there, get the links out. Popeye has an enormous amount of stuff and archives, great interviews with people like Fletcher Prouty, Judith Ferry Baker, so many others, and some of these shows I've done with him, but he's got a lot of stuff, and you're getting all that stuff back up again, aren't you, Popeye? You get most of that old material that's really great out there.
well, what I do is as YouTube mutes the where I find an old show that has been muted, I'll rebroadcast if depending on what it was about. I'll rebroadcast it here on KGRA for the listeners, especially if it was important, pertinent information and it lines up with what's going on today.
Hmm. Hey, you better watch out for somebody creating a deep fake of your voice. Have you seen that recently? Greg Reese, who does a lot of big videos for InfoWars, has a video up there, and you play it, and it's his voice, and he says, "I didn't do this video." And it's by this guy who's called Anonymous Official, who's been ripping off his material. It's getting up, his stuff is being taken down off of YouTube, right? But Anonymous Official is up there, and he's using Greg Reese's deep fake voice. It's incredible. I mean, we're living in a day and age, friends, where you can put on a radio show like Popeye, and I have done for many years, and the next thing you know, you're hearing us do a radio show that we never did. Weird stuff like that is happening.
Well, that technology existed like 20 years ago. There was uh I think it was if I remember correctly, it was oh, what is that general's name? Wesley Clark.
Right, right.
And he talked about, if you remember how he talked about after he had retired, and 9/11 happened, he went to the Pentagon to see, what was going on. And one of his former officers had pulled him aside, who was now working in the Pentagon, pulled him aside and said, "Sir, this is the list of the countries we want to invade and all that." Well, he's also said in the past that, and they were Iraq, like Iran, Syria, so Libya, um, and you see how well things turned out for all those countries, minus Iran. But we keep trying to bomb Iran because we just, well, not us. I shouldn't say we keep trying. Let me rephrase that. The power hungry madmen in Washington D.C. keep trying to do this, and mad women. When I say mad men, that's not. I'm not being sexist and leaving the women out. No, the women like Hillary Clinton and uh, all the
Victoria Nuland. Yeah.
Victoria Nuland, Pelosi.
Mhm.
If it first of all, when I saw Victoria Nuland was coming into Biden's administration, I was like, oh, here we go. Biden is Obama 2.0.
Right. He's worse than Obama, of course. And when you talk about deep fakes, I'm surprised they haven't put Joe in a room and put words in his mouth and maybe animated him. You know what I mean? It's hard to believe they're letting him wander away. He's going to wander off pretty soon. I mean, the guy's out of it. He's lost his mind, and evidently, and the Democrats know this. We're going to be talking about that, right, Popeye?
Yes. Well, to my point before I lose it, because I know we'll get sidetracked. I believe it was Wesley Clark who had talked about he was in a room with uh they were in a room at like a meeting, and it was basically like gentlemen. They were they were showing him a video, and uh it was basically like a mock attack on Washington, and on comes like the voice of Osama bin Laden, and taking credit for the attack and everything else, but it hadn't happened.
Yeah.
But they were able to mimic this like 20 years ago. That's why when you would see all those fake bin Laden videos come out, first of all, bin Laden always looked fatter or skinnier. He was constantly, his weight and his facial structure was constantly fluctuating. I mean, there was a lot of hinky stuff with that, and that gets into 9/11, which closer to 9/11, I usually do like broadcast after broadcast covering things like that. But my point is, those fake bin Laden videos that would come out, they could do this 20 years ago. Now, they didn't have the computing technology that we have now, or they might have, if the people behind the scenes had access to things that is coming out now. But with the aid of computers and technology advancing in the private sector, the military benefits from that as well. I mean, they make things, but it's not like they have super fast computers and everything. I mean, a lot of the computers that when I was in the military, the computers were running on Windows XP, and that's still the case in some cases in some areas. Although I to understand that they've upgraded, but I mean, they were, since hopefully, I would hope. I mean, we were running on Windows XP back in like the early 2000s. I would hope that they've upgraded since, but I know when, even a few years ago, that was a problem because there was still government agencies, and, I think by now they've upgraded, hopefully, but again, they were
Yeah.
running on Windows XP, which is kind of scary if you think about it. It's a very old operating system, and there's no more security measures put out for it. So you have like 0-day vulnerabilities, hacking, getting in is not as hard because now, things are connected to the internet more. Although the military is usually disconnected from like Comcast and stuff like that. They have their own internet. And then within that own internet, they have safety protocols where every branch has its own individual rate. That's an IT person that person who's that rate, their job is to specifically filter out any bad stuff coming in. But that's why they were worried about TikTok on people's personal phones, because they have no control over people's personal phones. That's why they're worried about spyware and malware on people's personal phones or their laptops, and they don't want those phones. When I was in, you couldn't hook anything outside to the internet. But what if somebody has, for some reason, everyone's using Wi-Fi now. So what if someone's on base with their phone and they want to turn their Wi-Fi on, and they somehow log into the base Wi-Fi signal? Well, their phone isn't secure. It's not a secure computer like the ones on the base. So I mean, that could be an issue. But that's all, that stuff is controlled. But they had the ability for the deep fakes 20 years ago. So at least the government did.
Yeah.
So imagine, if we're able to do that now as civilians, the late Kev Baker, him, Scott Lopez, and myself were on a Sunday broadcast, and years in 2019, back when we were live streaming on Kev's YouTube channel, and they had told me I had been like away from radio for about 2 years. I'd taken like a 2-year hiatus, and we were having a conversation, and they were talking about the deep fake technology. And this is in 2019. This is 4 years ago, and they were talking about it. And I said, well, if people are getting their hands on that stuff, the government wants them to, because they wouldn't let them. You'd have. I mean, look at how easy and how quick they'll send the feds to someone's door if they say something the wrong way online, and it gets attention nowadays. And even 20 years ago, they would have done that. They'd be at your front door. So if the ability to do deep fakes and things are out there, they imagine if you have the ability. And 4 years ago, it was horrible. It was garbage. In 4 years since they told me about it, I've watched this technology, like in the private sector, just grow astronomically. Imagine what the government has, because these same companies probably get government contracts to, just like AI. This is a huge problem, because you could have, false information put out. And it's already happened where a couple times where somebody made a deep fake and put it on social media, and it went viral. I saw a video where somebody had taken Joe Biden's face and they put it on Dylan Mulvaney. And it was like a video that Dylan Mulvaney had shot, and they redid it with Joe Biden's face and his voice. And Steve, it looked real.
Yeah.
I mean, you knew it was fake, but it looked real enough that if somebody saw that on their phone or whatever, they would have been like, "Wait, what? Is that
Right.
is that the president? What's going on?" And he was talking about how, "Oh, I'm gonna go get, I gotta have a Bud Light before I go out with my girls on Saturday night." And it
Yeah.
was very, and that's tame. Now people look at that and they laugh and they go, "Oh, that's funny," you know. But there's a dark side to that. What if they made a video that said Washington was just attacked? I mean, there was a video where there was somebody made an explosion that happened at the Pentagon and put it out on social media a couple weeks ago, and it freaked everybody out. It's like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and
Mm.
people were flipping out. Oh my God! And then it turned out, yeah, within a few hours it was debunked as being
Yeah.
fake. But
Mhm.
in that few hours, there was real panic. Now
Yep.
imagine what's going to happen in the 2024 election.
Right. And we've been talking about too, the Project Bluebeam and the possibilities of something like a fake alien invasion, which would, kind of fit into our conversation here on this network. And could that happen? Could they actually create these kinds of images? And, the big problem is, Popeye, a good portion of the population doesn't even bother to question what they're seeing and what they're looking at. Let me give you an example. When I was a kid, my friends and I learned how to make California driver's licenses very easy with a dark room, a photograph, and a laminated print. And we could produce California driver's licenses so good that some of these kids could rent cars and even buy liquor. Well, our parents caught us. You know what I mean? And said, "Don't you ever do that." We put it away. It was more of an art project for us, and it was, a criminal enterprise. You know what I mean? But when I look at those old driver's licenses that we made in those days compared to Obama's short form, I have to say, if I was somebody working at a liquor store and somebody showed me that as a verification of their age, I wouldn't sell liquor to them. It's so bad. It is such an horrible, the short form and the long form too, by the way. It's such a horribly obvious fake. And yet people, the whole government accepts all this. Even Trump backed down when he started talking about the birth certificates. And of course, we know that whole story. And the lady there, can't remember her name, the Secretary of State, I think it was, in Hawaii, who went through all this, died in that plane crash and all these other things that happened. But I mean, that fake, that wasn't even a deep fake, Popeye. So what I'm saying is, as this kind of stuff gets more intricate, it's going to be very, very difficult, as you pointed out, harder and harder to spot, right?
Well, it's going to be really hard to spot. It's already getting hard to spot now. It's 2023. Give it another year. What
Right.
what happens? What happens next year during the election?
Hmm. Yeah.
What happens when you start seeing videos of the candidates? How do you know? How do we know if this is real or not? And then there's going to be mudslinging going back and forth.
Oh,
And
yeah.
of course, if Biden is the presumptive nominee, right? Because he's the president. Usually, the president is the presumptive nominee. The party usually doesn't try to primary their own president, no matter which party it is. Although I don't know. There's constant talk. Should Biden run for a second term? Should he step down and allow somebody else? Well, of course, he should not run for a second term. But who else are they going to run? The only person I see them running, and you and I were chatting on Skype about this earlier, is Gavin Newsom. And you said the same thing. I mean, he's honestly, there's really nobody else for them to put up that would stand a chance to run against, unless for some reason the Republican Party decides to commit ritual seppuku and just stab themselves in the stomach with the biggest knife they can possibly find, metaphorically, YouTube and your stupid censorship. It was a metaphor, but you know what I mean. Unless they want to go out there and like pick the dumbest candidate, which I don't know. They have a tendency to do. And then I got to say, look, even though I like DeSantis as my governor here in Florida, he's taken this awful turn as a neocon.
Yeah.
And I heard him praising George H.W. Bush recently, a few months back. He thought he was a great guy. And I was like, whoa, and this was before he ran for president. And I was like, oh no,
Yeah.
oh no, who's supporting him? And then
Right.
you come to find out, you see the people behind him are Jeb Bush. No thanks. No thanks. Project for a New American Century, Jeb Bush? That guy?
Mm.
Another former Florida governor who was horrible as our governor, I may add. Horrible. The neocons are latching on to him, Steve. So it's like, I don't know. And there's already, I mean, I've already seen like his campaign used deep faked image or images of Trump and posted them. And it
Wow.
was like, I think it was Trump kissing Kim Jong-un on the nose, if I
Oh,
remember correctly, or something like just retarded like that. This is, I mean, you have presidential candidates already using deep faked like AI images.
yeah.
I mean, AI in the past year, look at AI compared to, 4 years ago, we were talking about, we have to worry about what's coming down the road with, leaps in artificial intelligence and what they're going to start doing. And within the past year now, all these AI chat bots are out and people are lapping it up. They're loving having conversations with it. But I don't think they quite get that the people the companies that own those chatbots allow them to speak to the AI because they want the AI to learn.
Right.
And
Right.
the AI is going to learn the absolute worst about humanity just from random conversations with
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, I hope it learns some good things, but in what science fiction movie have you seen this go the right way, Steve?
Not
Not
any
many.
that I can think of. Yeah. Shades of the Terminator series, of course. And yeah, we've seen this before. I don't know if I should mention this, but I don't know if you've seen the film Found Elvis Alive that Joel Gilbert put out, and you have the voice of Elvis narrating the whole thing. It's quite impressive as a film. Now, I'm the kind of guy that wants Elvis to be alive and have explained why he had to fake his death and escape. So I kind of want to believe it, but I can't tell, to be honest with you. I mean, even the album that he puts out, it's got songs that were written after Elvis died that he does on the album. sounds just like him. And I can't tell the difference between whether that's real or not. Now, I think Joel Gilbert is an excellent documentary producer. And I think what they may have done is actually created something real behind kind of a phony backdrop where Elvis actually gets to tell his story as why he left and why he had to fake his death and everything. And, it's pretty good. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Maybe some of the listeners have, but if you like Elvis, of course, and I mean, he talks about Bill Ayers and the Weather Underground and how he was a member of the Drug Enforcement Agency or got a badge. And of course, this is all true too. He was in Nixon's office where he got his badge and worked. And he talks about Frank Sinatra running everything in Las Vegas. And Sammy Davis Jr. had told him, stay out of the control of Sinatra. Don't go there. It's really, really bad. I mean, all these things that you're hearing about the background of everything, it lines up with the real Elvis Presley. And I cannot tell if he's real or not. And I didn't mean to get off on that subject, but it's one of those shows that you walk away thinking, I don't know whether that was real or not. Even I couldn't tell.
Well, interesting. Interesting. I did not see it, but maybe I
Oh,
need
you
to
should
take a look
watch
at
it.
that.
Yeah, you should watch it.
Hmm.
There's actually one of the actresses that he was with there, and she's either very good or it's very real. And she's listening to the whole story, and she breaks down and cries, and she says, "I can't believe you're still around and you're still here." And she cries. They don't show any pictures of Elvis. There's a photo on the album that looks like he's old and gray, which could have been aged. You know what I mean? There's no photographs of him, but the voice is very real and it sounds very real. He tells you his whole story, and why he had to leave, and why there were no photographs of him close up inside the coffin. The only photograph that escaped was taken by none other than Geraldo Rivera. Okay, and he's saying it was a wax dummy that was made up, and they had to put a very expensive air conditioning unit in the coffin so it didn't melt down. That's why it takes all these people to lift it. You see these guys stumbling, but it had an extra 600 pounds in it. And he explains a lot of things. It's very real. It's almost convincing. Like I said, I want Elvis to be alive. I really do, I guess. But if you watch that film, maybe some of the listeners have seen it and thought about it. Found Elvis Alive. You can see it up on I think Netflix or various places. You can find it out there, and the album that goes with it too. You can play some of the songs. One dedicated to Lisa Marie, and some others that are really good. But anyhow, I didn't want to get too much into that. We kind of got into the deep fake idea, and that was one of the most challenging deep fake things I have seen, unless it was actually real. You can't tell anymore.
So, who's going to be the first person to use artificial intelligence and deep fake technology to fake their own death?
Wow, I don't know.
Mm,
Mm.
good question. I mean, people fake their own death. The average Joe fakes their own death for certain reasons here or there. So, who's to say that, perhaps Elvis didn't fake his own death? Interesting side note about Sinatra before we get back to the Bidens. He's got weird connections to MK Ultra. He's got weird connections to a lot of things. And the original movie, he was in it. The
Manchurian Candidate,
Manchurian Candidate,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
He did something really weird where he like went and bought up all the copies that were available at the time
Mm.
of the film and like shelved them himself. There's a whole weird thing with his connection to that movie and the topic of mind control. And then of course he was connected to the mafia, so there's those connections. When you said Frank Sinatra's name, whenever I hear Sinatra, I always think of the Manchurian Candidate and the weirdness that surrounded like his reaction to that whole film
Yeah,
afterwards.
yeah,
And there's a lot of weirdness around it. So anyway, they were connected to crime families. And speaking of crime families, Steve,
yeah.
the current crime family in chief seems to be made of Teflon. I mean,
What?
nothing seems to stick to them. Now, okay, let me just pose this before we even get into anything about the Bidens. I want the listener to think about this just for a minute. I want you to think, if at all, do you think the media would ignore the way they do the Bidens? if you removed Biden's last name and changed it with Trump, and
Yeah.
you know me, I do not buy into the left-right paradigm. So I'm not like an avid, MAGA supporter where, there are people out there that are MAGA supporters that they fit the meme that the media tries to create of what people that support Donald Trump look like. Or think like, because they'll find like the dumbest person in the crowd and go to them, or the most, radical individual in the crowd and go to them. I am not a supporter of any political candidate. Okay. But I want to point out what's fair and what's true. Okay. I'm all about logic. All right. Really, anyone that's listened to me for a long time knows I'm about logic. So I don't pick left or right. But do you really think that if anything that the Bidens did, anything, let's just change Biden's last name to Trump. If it was Hunter Trump, do you think, and that was Trump's kid, do you think the media would let him off the hook and cover for his misdeeds and the things that have come out the way they have?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, there is an incredible double standard. It has been with a lot of these Democrats, even going back to the days of Bill Clinton. When he was impeached over that disgusting affair with Monica, the whole Monica Gate thing, all the time the investigation by what was called the Cox report as to the military secrets he had sold to China was being covered up. And they kept that under wraps until after the Senate had voted and Bill Clinton was allowed to skate. Of course, he had to have 66 votes and he didn't even get 50, not even a majority, which was kind of funny. Not funny, but strange. And then right after that, they released all of that information. You can go to the Cox report, just Google search it. Cox report. Now, not the Supreme Court justice, but I think he was a senator or a congressman, Cox. And it's all up there. You can see all the information of all the high tech, dangerous military secrets he had sold to China. And they didn't even bring all of that up because you know what happened, Popeye? That the country didn't have the stomach for it anymore. You know what I mean? That dragged out so long and it was so tedious and so disgusting that people were just glad to get it over with. And Clinton was ending his term. Why should they actually hold him accountable for any of it?
Right. But if the tables were turned and that was a Republican, although back in the day they used to kind of look out for each other more than they do now,
Yeah.
and because there are other people that are getting in that are more, at least when they get into Congress, they get voted in, and they may go in with good intentions. Although Washington does change you, there are, you know, I don't think anybody goes. Well, first of all, I don't think anybody goes to Washington with 100% pure intentions. I mean, I'm sure there's something like, I want to be a politician, or I want to do this, or I want to do that. Um, I think the only politician that I've liked in the last that I've really liked in the last like 20 years is Ron Paul.
Yeah. Right.
Now he's the only guy that's ever, like, he went in, and I shouldn't say maybe I that none of them go in with completely pure intentions, but I mean nowadays, there's got to be a level of fame, or they know that their name will be in the news, or they're gonna get a good benefits package for the rest of their lives. But like, years ago there were people that did get in that wanted to change things for the
Yep.
better. I mean,
Right.
Dr. Paul did a great job when he was in. And I don't always agree with everything he's ever said
Hmm.
or done, but I think he's been a man of his morals. And as long as he was in office, he always, he stood by what he said, and he wasn't paid off or bought off. He was the only politician that wasn't paid, and bought off, really. So,
Right.
I don't see. I don't like the political landscape. Really, I think people go to Washington, they want to change things for the good, but none of these, some of them may want to change things for the good, but they get bought. They buy into the fame. They get into the, like look at Boebert and the other one,
Hmm.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, they're having cat fights on the floor
Yeah.
in Congress. Like, ladies, like, have some more class. You don't help the Republicans. You make the Republicans look bad. I mean, just as much as there are Democrats that make the Democrats look bad, like, y'all don't make that, any of your views attractive to anyone that may not be on board because of
Right.
your behavior and your actions. And
Right.
they all do things. I mean, those two are just kind of out in the open, and the media, because they're on the right, focuses on them. But I mean, all those politicians that are there end up getting, as of late, seem to be getting caught in scandals. I mean, Ilhan Omar married, I think I think it was her brother she married to get him citizenship and to
Yeah.
like skirt citizenship rules. There's a lot of weird stuff that goes on, but what shouldn't be allowed is that, like, the way the media and the way I would say the way well, I guess you could say the Democrats, but I hate to say that because, like I said, I hate to buy into that left right paradigm. But the way that the media and the Democrats, everything is right wing now. And they're doing this because they're trying to put, they know that it's lies, they know it's wrong, but they know that if they can take any ideology that they don't like and label it, weird right-wing disinfo conspiracy nonsense, oh my lord, and these people are all Q followers. No, that's not true. I just saw an article the other day about the guy that led the march to Dealey Plaza in 2021, when John F. Kennedy Jr. was supposed to show up there. And I said, 2 years ago, they're LARPing this guy. The Q thing is a psyop, and now it's, if you mention Q, it's any JFK assassination research is now connected to that. So I mean, that's super annoying.
Yeah.
But that's the way that these psyops work. Anyway, the media is responsible for things like that. Like, no one in the JFK research community ever, before the Q thing came out, that no one ever talked about Q. No, there was no link to Q. Q all of a sudden didn't believe, Q. I remember supposedly Q let something out and it was, oh, I actually believe the official version of 9/11. And I was like, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There you go. There's your answer. 9/11 is my litmus test, and if you pass or pass or fail that test, that depends on if I'm going to believe you or not. And when people are like, if someone who's a big whistleblower comes out and says, no, 9/11 happened the way the government said it did. Okay, you're lying. It's a it's a psyop. But
Yeah.
quickly things were connected and linked to that, and that was the media. That was the power of the media to convince people that this stuff was, if you looked into any, and now it's any political thing, and now it's connected to right-wing extremism now, instead of and conspiracy research and conspiracy theorist has been linked through the media and the left-wing politicians and left-wing pundits, that anything like conspiracy related is now right-wing extremism. And I seem to remember a time when Medea Benjamin and Code Pink would be right out there with us, handing out DVDs and talking about 9/11 truth. Okay. I did it many a times in downtown Miami. And went to big events, handed out DVDs. Code Pink was there. We were just Federal Jack, and we'd link up with all these. We'd be there, and there'd be these other groups there. So while you're there, you'd kind of like link up and talk to each other, interview, maybe. And we always wanted to, get out and interview as many people as we could and get intelligence on people that we could, to find out who was real, who was fake, because there was a lot of like COINTEL type government actors even back then, the same
Right.
type of people that they admit were at the ground, on the ground at January 6th. This is why
Right.
before January 6th I kept telling people, don't go. It's a psyop. They're going to have government agents there. And I preached that on every
Mhm.
show I did, on
Mhm.
any live stream I did, on anybody's show I was on. I would say, don't do it, don't go. It's just, people would ask my thoughts on it, and I would tell them, don't go. Anyway, the media has convinced everybody that now any conspiracy research or even questioning what the criminal first family does is right-wing extremism. I mean, case in point, they found cocaine in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
They found coke in the White House. Has there been one straight answer about the coke in the White House? No. And if you keep asking about it, you're going to get labeled a right winger or right wing extremist that's obviously got an agenda against the first family. But if this were Trump and not Biden that were in office and they found coke in the White House, there would be special committees in Congress. There would be, you know, people would be screaming from the rooftops on every liberal media outlet to have him arrested. It was probably his. It was probably Donald Trump Jr.'s. They'd be all over his kids. They'd be over. But you reverse the roles. You put Joe Biden and his family in there, and it's people think Joe Biden is this like humble old grandpa who can't do anything wrong. And it's like, no, the guy was a gangster back in the day. He's still a gangster now, even if he's losing his mind. Yeah, sure, they probably got him all pumped up on all sorts of drugs, but the media creates that same narrative. So all the disbelief or misinformation that they've created in the past, they're still doing it. And you see it, I
Yeah.
mean, every day they gaslight people. I mean, the cocaine thing, Steve, what's her name? Jean Pierre or
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The
KJP, whatever the hell her name
White
is.
House spokeswoman. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she's horrible. She's
Mm-hmm.
like the worst liar. They ask her questions and she's like, I'm not talking about that. Next question.
Yeah.
And then they found coke in the White House. The president's son is a supposedly recovering coke addict
Right.
and crackhead whose laptop, if at first they said was Russian disinformation, it turns out, oh, it's not Russian disinformation, and that was
Mm.
his laptop. And now
Yep.
he's gotten in trouble for a few things. Remember when people talked about his gun charge,
Yep.
and they were
Mm.
like, oh, that's fake, that's misinformation, that's disinfo. Oh, but it wasn't, because that's one of the things that he just pled to a couple weeks ago. He got a plea agreement, that and on drug charges too. Let me ask you a
Mm.
question. How many average Americans get those same plea deals on
Yeah.
drug and gun charges?
None of us. Yeah.
Right,
Hardly any of us. Yeah. Hardly any of
right.
us. Yeah.
So, okay, is the Biden family made of Teflon? I mean, I know the answer. They technically, yes, they're, as a metaphor, they're made of Teflon. The media covers for them. I mean, if the media made a bigger deal out of things, the White House wouldn't be able to lie. The White House lies largely in part because the media is in lockstep with them, and they are afraid of them to a certain extent. Maybe they don't want the Biden administration going after them, because the Bidens have shown, Steve, have they not, that the Biden administration does not, and it doesn't matter if it's Joe himself or he sicks somebody in the administration, on somebody, but they don't have a problem covering up, but B, going after people.
Yeah.
They
Right.
they don't have a problem going after people at all, do they?
No, they don't. And you and I used to laugh. We were sending these pictures that one of Hunter Biden asleep with a crack pipe in his mouth, and I had a title on there, Hunter and the Crack of Dawn. You know what I mean? He's asleep with a crack pipe in his mouth. I mean, these were the kinds of pictures and photographs that were all around. I heard an excellent analysis, of course, and if you've ever lived with somebody who has a bad addiction, you'll kind of follow this through that. Hunter needed to go to Washington. He had to look good at these formal dinners. Remember that? Right after he gets a slap on the wrist, he's smiling and shaking hands with all the people at the White House dinner. And then he has to go with his father to Camp David for one day and come back. Well, he bought enough crack to get him through the whole thing, or whatever kind of, what is it called? Hydrogenated cocaine. I don't remember what the exact category of it was, but then he took some of it to Camp David and he kept the rest of it stashed, so he could come back and have some. He wasn't going to take it all at once, you know what I mean? He was going to take what he could use, and so in case he was patted down or someplace along the way or came back to the White House, he wouldn't have any, and that's what they found. I mean, it sounds to me exactly like what an addict would do, an alcoholic or an addict would do. It seems to me very evident it was probably his, but I don't know. I mean, there's no doubt that it should have been there, and how they're going to, they don't have to explain it though, because Popeye, remember, these people don't have to answer questions. They don't have to be honest with us. They don't have to tell us the truth. And the people are happy and satisfied. Now, Trump, it's a little different. I mean, they go after him for everything. If Trump has done one good thing for all of us, he's exposed the fake news media and the incredible bias of what's going on in Washington, D.C. And that is evident. And I think a lot of people are starting to see it, Popeye. A lot of people, I mean, we have seen it all along, but more people see the fake news for what it really is today. I was a news anchor at a small ABC affiliate many years ago. I left it a long time ago. I wanted to do other things. It wasn't a real pain to get up and leave, but I've got out of that news media a long time ago because I knew people are going to sit on that camera set. They're going to read a script, and you're going to be manipulated if you want that job. And people like those people who are anchors in these positions, Popeye. That's exactly what's happening with them.
Yeah, and I'm going to read a comment from the chat because this is a great comment. Movie Maker Joe over on YouTube. It's a clown car, not an administration, only the failing legacy media trying to make this cadaver believable. It's so very sad with all the incapable, pathetic, and transparent degenerates in office now. Well said. Well said, Movie Maker Joe over on YouTube. Yes, that is accurate. We literally have a cadaver walking, and he is still evil. I mean, look at Henry Kissinger. Kissinger's like 100 or 101. He just turned, and they may have to wheel him around. They did the same thing with David Rockefeller, and they'll hang on as long as they can. Joe is definitely got dementia or something. He fumbles and he bumbles, but he still gets what he wants. And I doubt, and I'm just going to go out here and say this, I doubt that his son gets searched. At the most, when you go into the Oval Office, or you go into that area, there's that cubby where people that have been in the White House have talked about. There's a cubby where you have to leave your cell phones and stuff. You can't have any of that stuff in there.
Right.
So they might leave the cell phones in there, and they might not want them to have cell phones. But I doubt, all Biden has to do is say, I don't want you to search my son. Don't touch my son. And he could easily tell that to his chief of staff, who then would convey that to the Secret Service. And he's the president. If you don't do what he wants, he can have you removed from his detail. Sure. So, there's that threat. And it's not like he doesn't have to make that threat. He's got a chief of staff. He's got other people that could make that threat for him. But it's clear to these Secret Service agents that I'm sure that if they go against his wishes on anything, their careers will be toast. So they do their job as Secret Service agents. But if they're told by the president or his chief of staff, that they don't want Hunter searched or whatever, then he's the only person I could think of that got cocaine into the White House. And
they don't have to. Yeah, I'm just going to say to Popeye, go ahead. But I was going to say that, in the private quarters of the presidential's space there, they're not searched or watched or anything like that. Now, going into the Oval Office, as you said, but, he could have stashed, like I said, I think he probably stashed his Coke in some location where he wasn't going to be patted down, getting out of the limousine, coming back from Camp David. He didn't have to worry about any of that going through into the private home residence of Joe Biden. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but throw that in.
No, you're well said. Good point. And I'm not attacking anyone. I'm not saying, well, he was doing cocaine, so he's a horrible person. That's not. I'm not making a judgment on if the guy has a drug addiction. Cocaine's a very addictive drug, and you could again thank the United States. You can thank certain people in the United States government for that, and the CIA for helping make that very prolific. So who knows when he was first exposed to it, as a youngster. If he's got a severe problem and a severe drug addiction, I'm not making fun of him for that. I've seen, people in my own family go through things like that. So I've seen loved ones go through that. I'm not making a judgment call based on that. But the fact that they found cocaine in the White House which is kind of a big deal. And they, I mean, all the drug hysteria the United States government has put on for years and years and years, and all of the people and all the chicanery that happened in the White House over the years, I've never heard of cocaine being found in the White House. And the the story just goes to show it's an example of how it doesn't matter what happens, that family can get away with it. I mean, we've talked about his crimes, like he got the Ukraine prosecutor fired. That just slides right off him like it doesn't matter. He admitted on video that he did it, and that he got the guy fired. And it didn't matter. Slid right off him. Media doesn't care. If you talk to most people in the United States that only listen to the mainstream media and that maybe like Joe Biden or at least support that his administration, they'll think that's some Russian disinfo. They'll think it's right-wing disinfo. They'll whatever label they want to slap onto it, even though he admitted to it on video. Just again, another thing that slides right off him. So now you have something that's a blatant example of hypocrisy, because if cocaine was found in your house by the Secret Service or a law enforcement agency, you would have them up your rear end. They'd get a warrant and they would search your house to make sure there wasn't any more of that illicit substance in your house.
Or plant it too.
Right. Or they might possibly be, planting it on you. Well, there's good point, Steve. There's plenty of videos where you see cops planting drugs on people. So they find even the smallest, and I love how they keep referring to it as a dime bag of Coke. There is no such thing as a dime bag of cocaine. They're referring to the size of the bag, which is a little, like what they would call a dime bag, but that's still not a dime bag of Coke. Cocaine is more expensive than that. And they probably found like what would be called an 8-ball or a half of an 8-ball. And that's still way more expensive than a dime bag. A dime bag references marijuana, okay? And that was when you'd go out, and there's still some street level dealers that do this. They sell little bags, maybe it's a gram bag. Now it's probably 25 or 30 bucks because of inflation, but they used to be able to go out and find the local guy, and you give him 10 bucks and he'd give you a little dime bag stuffed with weed. That goes back a long time ago.
Oh yeah.
And the media keeps referencing and saying the term dime bag. There is no such thing as a dime bag of Coke. The bag itself may be those small dime bags, but it's going to be, an 8-ball or half an 8-ball in there.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, depending on how big the bag actually was. They just keep referring to a dime bag. I think that what they probably found was an 8-ball or half an 8-ball. And that's pretty expensive. Cocaine's an expensive drug. And I mean, what are the chances that it's not Hunter? Okay. But you can't even talk about it. The president refuses to answer any questions on it. And the media, well, he didn't answer our questions. We asked a question, right? If Trump did that, or any Republican, but I say Trump in general, because Trump could have farted in the wrong direction, and they were pitchforks, and torches outside ready to take him out. Oh, we got to get him, blah, 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 blah. Trump did this, Trump did that. They literally found cocaine in the White House. And nothing, doesn't matter. Slides right off them. And they're blaming, first they blamed the library, and they said, well, that's a public area. It could have been anybody. Then the Secret Service came out and said, no, it wasn't found in there. It was found in the West Wing, and it was found by a uniformed officer who found it doing a sweep, a security sweep, and he found it in one of the cubby holes where they have to leave their cell phones and stuff, for security. And that's where it was supposedly found. Now the story has changed again. The White House is saying, no. It wasn't actually found there. It was found in an area that's open to construction workers, and that's currently under construction. So it obviously had to be one of the outside construction workers that brought the cocaine in.
Right.
Really, through all of your security at the White House, you're going to tell me somebody snuck in a bag of Coke through security without any help, without without someone saying, "Oh, let them in," or whatever, or without having the ability to not be patted down, which would be very few people. Again, going back to the possibility that the president could have said, "Leave my son alone. Don't mess with him." Okay, how many other people do you think are going to get through the security at the White House with a bag of cocaine in their pocket? Especially some random contractor that they're
Right.
letting into the White House. You don't think those guys have all of their equipment scanned? They're not checked. They're not, you think they just let them waltz in? Oh, well, they have a pass. They can just walk in.
Right.
No, it's not a construction worker. I doubt it. I'm sorry, but the possibility is there, Steve.
Yeah.
There's two things here. There's possibility and there's probability. I'm a probability guy. I'm also all about possibilities. Don't get me wrong. I love the possibility of anything. I look into a lot of different broad topics. But what is the probability that it wasn't Hunter who brought that in? And then couple that with how the White House is reacting. If it was a construction worker, why wouldn't the White House say, "Oh, well, you know what? This construction worker brought this cocaine in. It shouldn't have been brought in. He's been arrested. You don't do this. This is the White House. You have decorum. You have respect. This is the White House. You don't do that kind of stuff." They're not saying any of that. They're just Biden himself won't talk about it. The press secretary won't talk about it. So they're acting shady. And the
Yeah.
fact that the story has changed 3 times, if we take the titles off of these people and they weren't the president and the press secretary and his kid, and if we changed all of these people and just I want the listener to take the average person they know in their life and substitute them, a couple of the average people that you know in your life, all of us average folk, right? That us everyday listeners,
People. Yeah.
everyday human beings. I want you to take those people and substitute them for these high-ranking people in this story. Let's remove Hunter and now make it about a guy covering up for his kid's drug abuse. And he happens to have some sort of spokesperson who is, maybe it's a family member. Maybe the spokesperson is a family member, and that person is running sitting there, running interference and giving just the most cockamamie excuses or not talking about it at all for this father who's covering for his son's drug use. Now,
Hmm.
don't you now that sounds very plausible, does it not? So why is it not plausible if it's Joe Biden and Hunter and him using the press secretary? I mean, I think everybody knows what's going on. So my
Right.
point is, if any average person would have done this, average individual got caught by a regular cop, not even the Secret Service in the White House. I'm talking about like a regular cop on the street. You get in trouble for whatever reason, cops, frisk you, whatever. They find a quote unquote dime bag of weed on you, or a dime bag of cocaine on you, or any cocaine on you. You're going to jail. You're not going to pass. You're not going to pass go. You're not going to collect $200 on the Monopoly table. You're going right to jail. That's the way it works. But for this guy, he's allowed off. So I'm harping on it because it's a perfect example of the immunity that certain people get. And the funny part is what I've seen from the so-called left-wing people that are covering this, that do cover it, if they subscribe to the left-wing false paradigm, they say, well, it's not because he's Joe Biden's son, it's white privilege. They're trying to
Yeah.
make
Right.
they're
Yeah.
using that false narrative. Well, he got off because it's white privilege. No, wrong, because the average white person would get caught with cocaine. The cop's not going to go, have a nice day. Just take your coke and go do it. I mean, as a tow truck operator for over 10 years, I impounded a lot of cars working for different companies that had contracts with the police department. And they'd call us on scene, we'd show up, they'd be impounding someone's car because they had arrested the individual. And you talk to the cop, and a lot of the times these were drug arrests. And the biggest, number one, most frequent drug I saw used by these people, I mean, sometimes number two was cannabis. But the number one thing I saw people arrested for was cocaine.
Hmm. Yeah. I believe it.
So, yeah, and I've seen plenty of white people get arrested for coke. I've seen black people get arrested for coke, Asian people, Latino people. It's got nothing to do with any race privilege. That's a red herring. That's bullshit. it has everything to do with his daddy as the president. And that's why he also got suddenly on these gun and drug charges from years ago or a while ago that were brought against him, because there was plenty of evidence, and it was harped on that this should be done, and there was a lot of media attention brought to it by the alternative media, and also by I would say like Trump supporters and people that didn't support Biden, and maybe they thought that the election was not what the official version of events seems to be, or whatever reason they had. They understand that this president and his family are literally a bunch of criminals, and his son, it was harped on about what his son had done. So he got these light charges, but where's the charges for the things that he did with Burisma? What about all this
Right.
money and this?
Mhm.
What about people are like pissed off about the illegal things? Well, what do you want him to do? Get arrested for smoking crack with a hooker? No, that just shows that he's a degenerate. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, there was some other questionable stuff on that laptop where he had underage females, one of which was a family member that he was having sexual relations with. Where's that? How come that's not an arrestable offense? I guess it's okay. That's right. Pedophiles are a protected class now. I actually got a strike on one of my YouTube channels for a show I did like 10 years ago
Wow.
talking about pedophiles in Hollywood. And the title of the video was "Pedophilia is Rampant in Hollywood." And I had played clips of like Corey Feldman talking about what he went through, clips of
Mhm.
other like child actors that have come out and talked about it, and clips of people talking about what they went through. And this video had been up for years and years and years. I got a strike on Federal Jack Tube 6 about a month
Wow.
ago, or not
Wow.
even a month ago, maybe like 2.5 weeks ago. I took
Is it-
screenshots of it. They said it was for harassment and bullying.
Ooh.
Okay.
Ah.
Harassment and bullying because I called pedophiles, and
Mhm.
because I took them to task, and then I never made any threats. I never made any hurt. There was no harassment. I never named. I never actually went out and named. Like there's nobody that could be like, oh, he harassed me. I mean, I talked about people like, I even went into the connections like with Jimmy Savile and how what happened over in the UK, and like Lord Mountbatten, okay, things like that. I talked about stuff that Christopher Everard and I had discussed. But nope, this had to go because I guess pedophiles are now a protected class.
Guess
So
so.
it's
Yeah.
harassment and
Mhm.
bullying to call out the pedophiles in Hollywood and talk about how pedophilia is rampant in Hollywood. It's actually quite literally now an offense to where YouTube gives you strikes for it. And I got a strike. I got banned from live streaming, I think for like a month or whatever it is. And the strike lasts for 6 months because I did a show exposing pedophilia and the rampancy of it in Hollywood. So you see that kind of depravity is now protected. 10 years ago, I wrote an article on Federal Jack talking about how pedophilia was going to be a protected class, Steve, and that they were trying to normalize it, and that there was a bill at the time at the state level in California, and Congresswoman Jackie Spire, I don't know, I think she might have just retired um, recently, but she was backing it actually until she got called out for it, and then she said, "Oh, I had no idea what the bill had in it."
Huh.
But I wrote a whole article about how they were trying to normalize pedophilia as a protected class, and the California state legislature was trying to pass a bill that would protect pedophilia as a sexual orientation and
Yeah.
not make it a crime. I don't really care what your sexual orientation is. You want to be gay, that's perfectly fine. You want to be straight, that's perfectly fine. I don't care what goes on in your bedroom as long as it only involves consenting adults. But when you want to go after like 5 and 6-year-old kids and target them with depravity, I have a problem with that. And in the past, I mean, in the past like 2 or 3 years alone, it's gotten really, really, really bad. It's in your face. But 10 years ago, when I talked about this, it was I even had people in the alternative media tell me like, Popeye, I don't believe that. And I'm like, well, you don't have to believe it. I'm telling you what is, here's the evidence, here's the bill, here's the actual verbiage of the bill. Go read it. I mean, all you got to do is read the bills they pass. It's not, oh, that's conspiracy research. No, it's not. That's me reading the bills that you crazy people are trying to pass, whether it's at a state level or at a federal level. When you read their own white papers, their own research, their own work, their own bills, the things that they try to push, it's amazing what's actually in there. You just have to read it. That's why they hide a lot of it in 500 pages of pork or gobbledygook. I mean, yeah, there's people making money off those deals too, with certain bills, but there's a lot of stuff that there's bills that are just outright, hey, we want to make I mean, now it's we just want to outright, make pedophilia a protected class. So I guess Hunter is protected in that aspect because they don't want to talk about the weird stuff that he was doing with underage girls, and there's video evidence of it on his laptop, and one of those girls was his niece. I mean, the guy had sex with his own brother's widow and seduced his own brother's widow not too long after his brother died. And then he has this weird relationship with his niece, Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley Biden. The diary came out. There was weirdness there. She said, oh, my father took showers with me up until I was, much older. Not like a little kid taking a shower with their parent. I'm talking like she was like a teenager, and she talked about being abused. And of course, that was said to be faked. But then the people that, they wanted to go after, what's his name, James O'Keefe, because like a year before, the person who had that diary and who leaked it tried giving it to him. He couldn't verify it, so that the authenticity of it. So he passed on the story. And then a year later, the feds raid him looking for that diary, even though he didn't have it. Just because he was, I mean, they were looking for an excuse to go after O'Keefe. But you see, like, if the diary is not real, or if the contents of the diary are fake, why would you have the FBI raid somebody at like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning looking for the diary? I mean, if it wasn't real and if the contents of it were fake, you could just write it off as, oh, that's fake. That's not real. And you could put out a PR campaign against it. So why would you have somebody raided? And the people that did have the diary, they prosecuted them. Yeah. They went full bore and prosecuted those people to the fullest extent of the law. So, okay, what are you hiding? Why would you use the force of the FBI to go after the president's daughter's diary? Gee, that's weird.
Yeah.
That's just strange. Yeah. I mean, if she
he'd gone through he'd gone through all the proper procedure. O'Keefe did. You know what I mean? He said, we've got this diary. What do we do with it? We will bring it to you. You can examine it. We're not trying to hold something over somebody. This fell into our hands, whether it's legal or illegal. I mean, he confessed everything about all of what was there. And so they then break in to make this high-speed, high-level arrest. Is that what was all about there, Popeye? What do you think?
Oh, what? Honestly, I mean, I don't know, dude. I'm like, I saw a video where Hunter was doing 175, and I think he was smoking crack at the same time.
Yeah, right. Well,
so,
when you,
I mean, is he going to get arrested for that? Right. Is he going to get arrested for that? Or who gets arrested? Who goes to jail? Mm-hmm. The January 6th people go to jail. They're like locked up like they were trying to take over the country.
Yeah, Stuart Rhodes, Oath Keepers. We interviewed Stuart many times years ago, and he's all about getting people who.
I interviewed him less than a year before that whole debacle. I had him on. Yeah, mm-hmm. I did a special live stream with him on YouTube. I interviewed him. Me and John Shirley, Detective John Shirley, interviewed him.
Wow.
And like we actually did a show afterwards. I had John on KGRA here discussing it, talking about how he there was like his language then was completely different like 8 months later. Like in this like 8-9 month period, he got really, we pondered whether or not he'd been like paid off, whether he was, because as far as I know, Stewart wasn't a Fed to begin with, but it doesn't mean somebody can't be compromised. He had a lot of things going on in his life at the time. I know he was going through a divorce and stuff.
Yeah.
He didn't have a lot of money. You're in that kind of situation where you're going through a divorce. Maybe you're losing your home. You might be willing to compromise, take money to start, acting a certain way. Did he? I couldn't. I'm not really sure. Did he take money? I don't know. I can't really say he did or if he didn't, but I can say that he started acting much more belligerent than he used to. And he used to be like, don't give them an excuse. We're not violent. Don't be violent. Don't, he even said it the last time I interviewed him. Don't be violent, and
Right.
then, 8-9 months later, he's, and there's evidence they say that he was, you know, conspiring or had planned on at least getting people into the Capitol. I don't know if they would have gotten.
Well,
I mean, that was a
he
LARP event.
oh yeah, he
It was
told everybody not to bring guns, and he joked at one point. You could tell by the way it was phrased. Maybe we should have brought guns. I mean, it wasn't intended to be a threat. It was just saying, look at how everybody's being treated here. But I don't think he ever imposed any incitement to violence. Though Popeye, the question I have is what's happening on the financial end with Larry Fink and BlackRock and their credit scores for these corporations. These environmental, social governance credit scores, and they can force these corporations to go along with these agendas. I think they got to Target. I think they got to Bud Light. I think they got to Fox News. They can basically put such financial pressure on these corporations to get them to cooperate with it. I think it has a lot to do with their ENG or ESG credit score system, where Larry Fink says himself, we're going to force and we are going to use firm demands about what we're going to do here to control these corporations, and they can basically rip funding out. Look at 700 and what was it, $57 million Fox paid to Dominion for a defamation suit. A defamation suit. They only make something like $50 million, in their gross revenue, and they end up getting almost over three quarters of $1 billion on this whole defamation. Now, remember, these are government contractors, okay? And somebody has an objection with, I mean, they're not even dealing with really the public. These are people who have contracts with the government here, and they should be available or should be answering to the public as to their performance. And when Fox did all this, of course, this led to the end of Tucker Carlson, as you know. So I wonder at times, how deep are the pockets here to force these kinds of social governances upon us right now from the very, very big $20 trillion in leverage at BlackRock alone. And then there's Vanguard, State Street, and some of the others, JP Morgan. But anyhow, I didn't mean to take us off that track. But, when you realize that we don't have a judicial system that works fair in this country anymore, there are those people who are involved with all this big financing that's paid everything off. And then there's the rest of us still thinking that we have a constitutional government. And we're out to lunch. We're not anywhere near connected to what's happening anymore in this country.
To quote Wesley Snipes from New Jack City, money talks and bullshit runs the marathon. Okay. they seriously, I mean, these it's all about, money and power. Those with money and power. And it's not, the funny part is the general public started to wake up to this years ago. And what the powers that be did was they switched the narrative to racism, and everything is about racism and white privilege and what all this crap. What they're doing is they're getting the people to argue amongst themselves again, because the average people were like, wait a minute, none of this is benefiting us. And people were starting to like ask questions. It was right around the time of Ferguson when that whole thing in Ferguson happened, and the media created that narrative of, racist white cop wanting to go out and kill black people. They knew that they could stoke that fire, and they did. And politicians joined in because there's an agenda. And if you get everybody fighting amongst themselves, those people aren't paying attention to what the politicians and the people with power and money are doing. They're too busy arguing amongst themselves over stupid things, getting pissed off because, um, you know, perhaps something is, uh, uh, like perhaps you go out, Steve, and you decide you're going to go rob a Walmart. You decide you're gonna go rob a Walmart. You're gonna go in and you're gonna, you know what? I'm gonna go rob this Walmart. I'm gonna steal whatever from this Walmart. Okay, that's fine. But if somebody with money and power did the same thing, or their kid did the same thing, you might never know about it. Steve might go to jail. It'd be all over the news. Steve Starr steals, $5 bowl of, pre-made bowl of, cereal. One of those little prepackaged bowls. Maybe you stole like a $5 pack of them because you're hungry. But doesn't matter. Steve Stars is the evil plebe. He's got to go. He's got to go to jail. Meanwhile, the people in power, they do far worse crimes. You never hear about it. It's never on the news. Okay. So back when Ferguson happened, people were questioning why the cops had armored vehicles. They were questioning why the cops looked like special forces. Okay. They were these questions. People were saying, hey, Joe and I did a whole broadcast. There was an incident in California. And I can't remember the city in California right now off the top of my head, but there was an incident in California where somebody had been killed by the cops, and it was really questionable. And there were locals that were getting really pissed off about it, and they were protesting, and they were like marching, and they were demanding answers, and things kind of got out of control. And there could have been agitators in the crowd, as there usually is. But very shortly, you saw the police driving around in camo outfits, and nobody was wearing name tags. Nobody was wearing identification patches. So it didn't say police. You couldn't tell if they were cops. You couldn't tell if they were, Army Reserve or Special Forces, National Guard, what was going on. You couldn't tell anything. Okay. All you could tell is there were guys in camis running around with fully automatic weapons, riding on the sides of pickup trucks. They had like, rails on the sides of the trucks, and these guys were standing on them, holding on to a rail on the top. And they were, the truck, it was a pickup truck, but it was, almost looked like a little armored up truck. And it was obviously made to carry these guys around. And it was their tactical vehicle. And they were driving them around, standing on the sides of rails. And they looked like a military operation. And people were like, why are cops showing up to protests against police brutality dressed like they're the special forces? They're not. There's a difference. Cops are civilians. When you hear cops refer to civilians, you need to remind them that they're civilians too. The only thing you have is civilian or military. Okay. Cops are civilians too. They're not part of the military, but for years, they've been, folded into that mindset where they're just as militaristic as the military. It's you guys versus the regular people. No, man, you're a citizen. You're a regular average individual. People, you're a civilian. You don't forget that. Don't forget that you are a civilian. Police are civilian. They're not military, but that line has been drastically blurred. And that happened all around that time. And the narrative people started to say, Steve, was, wow, it's kind of weird. Why do I see cops driving around in all these armored Bearcats and stuff on the street? So why are they dressed up? Why are they getting all this surplus military gear? The 1033 program. Why are they getting all this military gear? What's up with this? So even MSNBC was forced to do pieces about it, because I remember Rachel Maddow doing half-assed pieces about it. And I used to do woodsheddings. All my older listeners know I used to play Rachel Maddow shows and a couple other people, and I used to like take their clips and I would play them on air, and I would do wood sheddings of it. And I remember her doing like a half-assed job talking about this situation, and I took her to task for it. And it was like, no, this is, look, this is a real problem. Finally, the mainstream media was focusing, it had to address it because everybody else was chattering about it. Social media, they understood the pulse of the individual was starting to wake up. As Zbigniew Brzezinski said like 10 years ago, for the first time in history, mankind is becoming politically awakened. So they realized that this was a problem. So they took this narrative of, hey, why are cops dressed up like G.I. Joe? And why do they have armored vehicles? And they twisted it to be cops are racist and want to hurt all black people. Now, that was a very real problem. That was a very real concern in the black community, and it is a problem in the black community. And there have been cases, plenty of cases, where cops, whether they're black or white, overstepped their boundaries and did something, went way too far, and either beat to a pulp or killed, young black men. So that was a real fear in the community, and the media knew how to take that fear and whip it up into a souffle, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
And then in the past, now it's turned into what you see now over the past few years. It's morphed into, this narrative of anything you say is either racist or you're a transphobe or you're this or you're that. It's always got to be a label. The Nazis did the same thing to marginalize their opponents. They labeled them different things, so it was easier to attack, because it's easier to attack that label. Okay. And all you have to do is focus all your energy on hating that label, and then sling that label and attach it to anybody that views what you're doing as wrong. It doesn't matter who they are. And you can slap whatever label you want, and then you get the people to focus on that label. And that's what the Nazis did. And our government does the same exact thing. So nobody was paying attention to the militarized police. They were too busy in the police state and the police brutality getting out of control. No. And it was middle class white people that were starting to wake up too, because they were realizing that, hey, wait a minute, I'm getting treated just like I've seen the cops treat, these poor people. And I'm not saying that every middle class person, was ignorant, but there were people that were well off, maybe upper middle class, that were getting pulled over out of the cars, beaten, tased. There was an old lady who a cop shot her in a church parking lot because she refused to sign a ticket and went to go roll her window up. And like a Nimrod, he put his arm in the window and grabbed her by her throat. So he was holding her by her throat, and she closed the window on his arm, and he was squeezing her throat, and she got panicked and she took off across the church parking lot. So he pulled his gun out and shot her in the head and torso multiple times through the window to get her to stop the car. And I remember covering the story, and people were like, oh, well, she shouldn't have, there was the narrative, well, she shouldn't have run. Well, what would you do if you were like, well, I'm not going to sign this ticket, and the cop was yelling at you, and the lady was scared, so she rolled her window up, and she goes to roll her window up. The cop shouldn't have reached in her window. He put his hand in the window, and he grabbed her by her throat. And then that's when she took off, and then he shoots her. So, but she ended up dying over a stupid traffic ticket.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't just the average black kid that, or a Latino kid getting shot and killed, where, the regular people that maybe were a little better off, that weren't paying attention, the upper middle class, they weren't looking at like what was happening, because they were just like, oh, well, that's in the city, that's in the inner city, that's a problem with black people or brown people. No, suddenly white people were getting treated the same way. And it happened. It was usually lower income white people. Now it was getting up into the middle class and into the upper middle class, and they were starting to realize it, and they were waking up. Now it doesn't matter if you go, well, black people got treated like that for 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. Yes, they did. And it was abhorrent. And I've done many shows on it. But what I'm saying is the average white person was starting to finally pay attention. Like the people that maybe didn't pay attention to police brutality, or were the ones that would be like, yeah, well, if you weren't running from the cops, then you have nothing, you You got no
Right.
reason to run from them. You got nothing to hide. Just, the cops aren't going to hurt you. Well, they were having the same interactions. So people started to wake up to police brutality, the police state. People started coming together on that issue. And you can't have that. So they freaked out. And I really think that the powers that shouldn't be looked at this and said, we can't have these people coming together. This is like one of those things where we have to keep them divided. This is a huge divide. We can't have them coming together. So they twisted the narrative. The media twisted the narrative, and it soon quickly became about, you know, white cops hating and wanting to kill black people. And as we've seen since that narrative has been, put out there. There was a case like 8 months ago where a young black man was on the way home. The guy was taking pictures. He was like a photographer, and he was on his way home minding his own business, and he got pulled over by this gang unit in this anti-gang unit. And I think it was in like Tennessee or somewhere around there, Tennessee or Missouri, somewhere around there, and or maybe it was Kentucky, one of those three. And I can't remember the young man's name right now, but he got pulled over, and it was all black cops, but they were of that same mentality that they had been trained, where cops, like I said, cops have been militarized, and they beat this kid. And then it took forever for the paramedics to get there, and then you could see that some of the paramedics didn't do their jobs and blew the kid off and didn't take care of him like he should have, and he ended up dying.
Yeah.
So it's not a problem about, it's not the cops don't it's not really about black versus white. We need to like shed that and understand it's a police state, that the cops are trained a certain way, and that it doesn't matter if they're black, Latino, Asian, white. They could be Martians. They could be purple with pink polka dots. If they're wearing that uniform, they're receiving the same training, and they're trained that like everybody out in the world is they're at like a war with scum and evil, and they're told that they're the line, that's that thin blue line. They're the line between normalcy and chaos. I mean, I have friends that were cops, and I almost became a state trooper years ago. And I've had these conversations, and there are good police officers, but unfortunately, when they do their good job, when the good ones, they try to weed them out, because they don't want somebody with a conscience. They don't want somebody. Once in a while, you get one that's all right, and they like to keep him around because he makes good PR. Maybe somebody shoots a good video of him doing something good. But right now, they're all trained the same way. I mean, yeah, there's active shooters. There's a lot more chaos. So there's that. But they're trained before all this chaos was happening. Before Clown World became Clown World, they were trained the same way. They were highly militarized. And when people started to notice that and question that, is when the narrative was changed purposely to get us all fighting amongst each other, so we don't pay attention to what's going on. And they still use that to this day. If you question Biden, you question the Biden administration about anything, if you're not asking a good question, if you're not asking something that KJP can answer from her little portfolio book, you're going to get called by her a right winger, or you're going to, if the subject that is asked about will be described as like right wing conspiracy theory or whatever. And it's the same thing. It's all it now. It's the right versus the left, and it's everything is evil right wing extremism. I mean, you could ask a valid question, and it's, are you being right wing? And it's like, no, that's so stupid that you're even trying to get down to that level and stoop to that level. But that's the way they are. And I want people to realize that they think the general public is stupid. They think you're all a bunch of idiots. I don't think that. They do. That's the reason I'm pointing this out, because I know if I point it out, people are going to go, oh, wow, he's right. Yeah, that kind of did happen that way. Yeah, it did. They've been playing all of us against each other. They want everybody to fight. They don't want Steve and I and other people to point out to you these things. And if someone says,
Right.
well, wouldn't they just take you off air? They have. I mean,
Yeah.
they literally have.
Yeah.
I was depersoned from social media. They literally depersoned me. You know how hard it has been to come back from literally be just like they depersoned Alex Jones. They did the same thing to me. They removed me off of almost everything. Luckily, I was able to keep my Twitter account,
Yeah.
but everything else I was gone,
Yeah.
removed. Sayonara. And there was no recourse. There was no recourse. You know, there was none of that. There was no, hey, can I get my social media accounts back? And that was how I did a lot of interacting with guests and other alternative media hosts, other researchers. That's all gone.
Right.
I can't. I know I'm not. I can't. I actually tried making a new Facebook years ago just for the radio show, just to see if they let me. And no, I can't. Doesn't matter. Even when I've tried from using a VPN. So there's anything related to my name and the show's name is just, it's blocked. I get it. I know why they did it. I knew it was a kind of inevitable. One day it was going to happen.
Yeah.
But they do that. They did deperson me. So and it was this was before the election. This wasn't like after the election, when this was like this was October. The election was in November. This happened in like mid-October of that year. And I haven't I got my socials nuked. YouTube. I couldn't upload forever to YouTube. People were like, "Where are you?" I couldn't upload, and then they've muted. I still see questions and things coming in. People, they come in. Steve, I saw comments the other day. Somebody put a comment and said, "Why is this episode of this show? Where is the audio?" And then somebody else had commented to them, like replied to them and said, "It's YouTube. It's obviously not Popeye." Like, people are starting to realize finally that, years ago when I complained about censorship, people would, people could have blown it off because it wasn't as prevalent. And people did. People were like, "Oh, well, maybe you did something to piss them off. Maybe you did copyright." Now they're ban happy if you don't say the right thing, Steve. Especially since the whole cough thing, the whole thing that happened a few years back. If
Right.
you mention a certain jibby jab, or you mention certain things, they will, you get down vote. You either get, you get a few things. Either you'll get pushed down to where they're literally shadow banning you, from, meaning the algorithm won't let you get picked up, and it won't put you out there. YouTube used to be very different. It used to be run very different, and you can see that the algorithms have obviously been changed over the course of time. But whatever AI or whatever they're programming they're using to monitor things, I've seen YouTubers, they can't even say, they have to use certain words to discuss certain things. Like, you can't say certain words. You can't call, we'll use, since I'm streaming to YouTube right now, I won't say it, but let's say if you wanted to call a boot, you couldn't call it that. You'd have to call it like a tall shoe.
Yeah.
That's the
Right.
kind of word magic
Yeah.
they have
Pronouns.
to they
Yeah.
use.
Yeah.
They have to, because they can't say, I mean, well, there's certain words like this, like the true crime community. I saw channels get strikes against them because maybe they would be talking about somebody. You have to, instead of saying a certain word that starts with an S, you have to say self-deletion. Or you
Yeah.
can't say, oh, that person was, like, if someone kills another human being, that's called a word that starts with M. Well, you can't say that word in certain instances. You have to say that person was unalived. I mean, and it's also serving to make the general populace dumber, Steve, because
Yeah.
you start to make people, you're reprogramming people's lexicon and their brain. And I mean, pretty soon we'll be as smart as Joe Biden is on his best day.
Yeah. Well, you know what it is, Popeye. When you talk about the police and the training, I had a friend who was going through police training, and he would say, can I put you in a couple of holds here because I need to practice these?" And I'm going, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah." So he would, put put an arm around my neck and my hand behind my back or something like that. And you could tell that he was of the mindset, the wrong kind of person to be a cop, really, in my thinking. But they're learning the authoritative rule mindset of what they do. You know what I mean? It's not like they're there to uphold the peace. It's there, they're learning the science of control is what they're learning. And it's a little bit different than the way police officers were trained a long, long time ago. And so it's all about, as you said before, you are the possible enemy combatant. You know what I mean? You are either going to go along with them or you are now a person that has to learn authority. You know, that's the way a lot of cops look at these things right now with these kinds of SWAT teams. It's not necessarily the average police officer. And I've known a lot of great cops in my time. I've known some real bad ones too, you know, and they can sometimes they can have a bad day. But the bottom line is, you know, this is all about that governance that is coming down here. I mean, we are being told everywhere that we don't matter. Your vote doesn't matter. Your opinions don't matter if they don't fit the governance guidelines, Popeye. You know, it's like we've been talking about it for so long. And I think there's actually a refreshing awakening to it all right now. I mean, look at RFK Jr. He has the best prospects for the Democratic Party, I think, that I've seen in a long time. Trump will be coming back, but he's starting to say the right things. I like a lot of what Trump has said. I think he's been very short-ended on his delivery of what he talked about, which is kind of disappointed with extremely disappointed me. But at the same time, the public is waking up, I think, to a lot of this. And I don't know how much further it's going to go. It's going to come right down to the wire, if you ask me. What do you think?
You know, I don't know who's going to be the presumptive nominee, at least for the Republicans. Although Trump is, by every time they take a poll, no matter what they throw at him, uh, he's still ahead of the polls. You know, hands down. Maybe, and you know, maybe that could be people posing, Democrats posing as Republicans, pretending to be Republicans, saying, "Yeah, I'd rather have Trump," because maybe there's this theory that's happening because Biden is afraid of running against DeSantis or something. I think if anybody, they're afraid of Trump. That's why they're trying to make it so he can't run. Because I think that they realize that, you know, when people were running against when they ran Biden against Trump, and that was a joke of a whole election anyway. You know, Biden was campaigning from his basement, but you had people that were pissed off about not having jobs. They had lost a lot of money. COVID was going on. People were scared. And no matter what the economy was great up until that whole thing happened. And
Yeah.
afterwards, people were so upset about the coof that
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of misplaced anger. And he was the guy that was in charge at the time. And the media did a great job of vilifying everything he ever said or did. As I said earlier, you know, like, ooh, Trump farted, news at 11. I mean, it didn't matter what he did. Literally, it was like, dun, 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 you know.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the we have the Sopranos in the White House right now. Well, the wannabe Sopranos.
Yeah.
You know, they're on the level of criminal just the same
The
with the
bozo
amount of money.
Sopranos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bozo Sopranos, the bumbling Sopranos. And they get away with anything, and the media doesn't care, and the media's literally got its fingers in its ears, and it's going la 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 la, like it, you know, doesn't hear it, doesn't see it, got its eyes closed. We don't want to talk about that. Can't talk about that. But and everything is. I mean, I even see it with somebody will if there's an article posted on, like, say, the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail will, you know, I have my own issues with the Daily Mail, but I'll give them credit. They at least do cover the Hunter stuff or when Biden makes mistakes and stuff. And there will always be somebody in there that there'll be people in the comment section and they'll be having a conversation about the article. And there's always, whether it's trolls, paid bots, all of that stuff, you know, or bots or paid trolls, all that stuff exists. You'll see people in there and they'll be like, oh, well, what about Trump? And, you know, he did this, 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 and this. And it's like, well, that's right. And there's lots of articles written about Trump. And, you know, Trump has done some shady stuff over the course of time. A lot of it was shady real estate deals. But I mean, he he didn't do anything really to hurt this country. He didn't screw this country over. I mean, the economy was much better. The country was in a much better place, except for the whole coof and all the things that came with it, the lockdowns and everything else. Remember, you know, Biden ran, and his whole campaign was this change. We're going to fix things. We're going to make things better. And people thought, well, Trump, he's constantly got, bad press. He says he can't stop saying stupid things sometimes. So people, now they're pissed off about losing their job, and they're stressed about the coof and the jibby jab and everything else. They're going to blame him. He's the guy that's in charge, so he's naturally going to get more of that blame. And I think that led people to vote more for Biden. It doesn't mean that I have my own suspicions about the election. What I'm saying is the people that did really vote for him, I think a lot of people voted for him for that reason. I've seen plenty of street interviews where they've gone out and interviewed people, and it doesn't matter what race they are, where they're from, there's a lot of people that voted for Biden that regret it. And they said they wouldn't have voted for him. They would have voted for Trump because they recognize that under Trump, the country was in a better place. And that's why they don't want him to run. And they're going to do everything in their power to make him not be able to run, because it's hide too hard. It's excuse my brain. See, that's my accident brain. It's hard to hide the evidence of how far this country has gone and what has happened to this country since Trump left office. And I'm not saying he was a saint or anything else. He spent a lot of money, and his administration really needed to cut back on, making the deficit worse. But he was doing a lot of positive things for this country, and at least the money was being invested into the country. Whereas, and we weren't going to be footing the bill for NATO anymore. We weren't going to be paying for any of that. And now all of a sudden, we're paying all those bills again. Now we've given over $40 billion to Ukraine. Where's that money?
Yeah.
And I know people are going to say, well, Popeye, we haven't really given them $40 billion. You're right. We probably gave them like $10 billion, and the other $30 billion went to Boeing and Raytheon and all these other military industrial complex companies that make all the bombs and weapons and everything else that we're giving them. Oh, now we're giving them fighter jets. But we promise we'll stay within our own borders. Sure, you're not going to attack Russia with those jets. Right. We're just poking the bear, man. Remember, Biden is Obama 2.0 to a large extent. The administration is anyway. He and his family are criminals in their own right? But the administration is like the Biden administration, or the Obama administration 2.0. There's like Victoria Nuland. There's a lot of these people. Valerie Jarrett's in there, but you don't really hear them get too much press attention, because the first they would be equated with the Obama administration. So you see how they quietly do things, but they bring a lot of these same people back in. So the agenda isn't going to change. And Obama wanted to get rid of Putin out of Russia. And that's because who was his mentor? Zbigniew Brzezinski, who boasted about taking down Russia using the Mujahideen and dragging out the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah, Soros as well. Soros is a big part of this, of course, and he was the one, the Open Society Foundation and so many things that were funding a lot of these people like Antifa, Black Lives Matter, all these color revolutions that he's been involved in for so long. And, the first one started, of course, when Crimea voted to join the Russian Federation. I think it was about 95%. Of course, the Soros clowns could not have that, and they began that was during the Maiden, of course, and the whole thing that started at that time, and it's continued just recently, even to the threats against the nuclear reactor there, or the bombing of the dam, the Nord Stream pipeline, all these other things. Was it 40 million or 40 billion or 140 billion? I think in total it was about 140 billion is what I'm hearing, Popeye. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, that's not direct to by the way, to Ukraine, but that is through the money and expenditures for all the guns and weapons and things we've sent along. You know what I mean? The care packages, if you like. But, I remember when the ladies in Ukraine got together back right after that whole situation with Crimea and began to burn draft cards of their husbands and their sons. And they said, we don't want to be going to war. Ukraine had everything to gain from a great relationship in between Russia and Europe. I mean, they were the middlemen. You know what I mean? There was absolutely no reason for them to want to antagonize what was going to be a growing European, Euro-Asian economy. And why? They got talked. I mean, obviously the government was overthrown there. And you have these right wing people, these Nazis, these fascists, the true fascists there implementing this kind of warfare to the point to where, now remember, Putin said at the beginning that they had, since the people in Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass region had voted to affiliate with the Russian Federation independently, that Putin was going to recognize them. And this was in line with the UN Charter 51. And he said the UN allows for this. Now, is Putin going to go to the UN with a bunch of papers waving in his hand? Well, look what happened with Crimea. I mean, before. Obviously, he said, well, the legal aspect of this is here and stands, but there's no way we can enforce it except to say that we are going to support the border there because this is legal and it's all been processed properly. Why people got to believing that somehow they had any reason in the United States of America to want to intervene in this kind of conflict at this point is absolutely insane. But it's the news media. The news media lies and lies and lies to us, friends. And now we're stuck in this thing, and Russia is they're pretty well dug in for what we hear from what's it, General Douglas McGregor, some of the comments and things that we've had recently that he's talked about over here. We are in a stalemate here. Putin is not going to be backing off. He's not going to be leaving. We're going to be spending more money, and the situation's going to get more intense over there all the time. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a money pit, but see, they want to go to war with Putin, but they know the Americans are not going to stomach another war. They know after Iraq and Afghanistan, they let that charade go on way too long. They know that people are now awake, generally, that the Iraq war was an illegal invasion and it shouldn't have happened. At the very least, it was a mistake, and that's not dissing the troops that were sent over there. That's not it's fact. There's plenty of people that have come back from the Iraq war, Iraq veterans against the war. I did entire broadcasts in the past.
I remember those,
where I would broadcast the testimonies from. I was a member of IVAW, and I mean the organization kind of started to get a little or sucked into kind of like the left wing of things years later, but I was original member of it and not one of the founding members, but when it first got formed, like in the first year,
right?
And I interviewed people that were members. I played testimonies that had been put out, and I did so many shows that I had a Vietnam veteran who was involved in the Winter Soldier testimonies from Vietnam contact me and send me a documentary called Sir No Sir, and told me that I had permission. They had put this movie together, and it was a documentary about it, and I had put it together. You don't ever really hear about any of that stuff either. The opposition from the veterans that came back. I mean, they got labeled as, kooky hippies. You were just an anti-war hippie, and they would try to they took the anti-war movement and tied it heavily to the counterculture movement. And now, yes, there were counterculture people that were involved in anti-war, activities and in protests and stuff like that, and they were big against the war. But just being against the war didn't make you an automatic hippie. But you see, that's how it was lumped in. So then, like around the 80s, what do you see in the movies? You see hippies portrayed as like weirdo anti-war whack jobs that, and that's the way, and it's this meme. It's,
Yeah.
it's not good to be against war. We need to be for war. And that's because the the military industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about really does exist, and it does control things.
Yeah.
And they want war because war is profitable. George
Yep.
Carlin had a
You know,
whole big segment on this
in that
where
speech too.
where he used to drop truth like crazy, Steve. He used to be, Carlin had a great this great bit about, war. And yet, they tried canceling him. That's why you don't see comics. It's a shame you don't see too many comics emulating uh, his style of dropping truth the way he did. Because I mean, that old adage, if you're going to tell somebody the truth, make them laugh or they'll kill you. He literally did that. I mean, his whole shows, if you go back and you watch his shows, especially now, given the gift of time and being able to look back on things and Monday morning quarterback things, watch his shows that he did. You realize Carlin was telling you the truth. He was just making you laugh so you'd
Yep.
accept it.
Hmm.
But his shows were like just dropping truth bombs left and right. And he was
Right.
like, war is one big prick waving dick fight. That was part of his thing. And he's like,
That was
that's why
his
all
gig.
bombs and rockets are shaped like penises. They're
Mm.
phallic. He's like, it's done by old men throwing their penises at each other and trying to extend their penis into everybody else's country, basically. Or he's a dick. But I was trying to be more family friendly. Anyway, I guess it really can't be family friendly when you're
No,
making that joke.
no.
But he was, that's basically, it's a good metaphor, and it made people laugh. And then he would get further into the politics of it and, about war, but it made people think. The laughter and the jokes made people think. And it's like, look, man, if I could get somebody to think about war a little bit differently, if I can get people to realize that us dropping $40 billion into an endless money pit of war, doesn't matter if it's Afghanistan or in Ukraine. I mean, we've dumped more money to them than we did in the entire 20-year war campaign in Afghanistan. I mean, where is all that money going? I know it went to the military industrial complex to buy lots of munitions and stuff, but I mean, like Zelensky's wife has obviously had some cosmetic surgery. She had a boob job, you can tell. She's obviously had some other plastic surgery done. I guess being the first lady of Ukraine really pays well, you know.
Yeah, I guess it does. Yeah, it's very interesting. And getting back to that Eisenhower speech that we talked about, there were actually three warnings in that speech. If you listen to it, he warned us first of the military industrial complex. Second, he warned us of a technocratic elite. A technocratic elite, which we see today. He said all the old blackboards are now replaced with computers. We have a technocratic elite. Then finally, he said massive debt that would swamp the nation and throw us into slavery. And he said these three things are the biggest three problems that we are going to be facing in the future. We've heard a lot about the military industrial complex, which you just talked about, enumerated on. But now we also have this technocratic elite. We are being tracked, we're being watched, all of our data is being sucked up. We know some of these people are being injected with nanoparticles, and these are going to be reactive with your 5G phones. We know this is starting to happen already. There's a lot of articles coming out about this right now. People are going to be electronically controlled to some extent by the things that are being put in their bodies. And then finally, massive debt. It's going to creep in. We've seen what's happening with BlackRock, we've seen Vanguard, all these major corporations moving in to take over property. They want everybody in these 15-minute cities, which are essentially open air or closed air concentration camps. For instance, they want you out of your car. They want you in a building, whether you get heat, food, water, or you can use the elevator. that's up to your behavior, I suppose. But this is where it's going, Popeye, right now. And if people, or if we keep going this way, and I think people are waking up, I'm actually pretty positive about it. But we've got to get real and fast about where this is headed, because goodbye America is going to be, the situation if we don't get with it very, very soon, my friend.
Aaron Russo warned about this. He said
Yes.
that when he talked to Nick Rockefeller, I've played that interview
Yeah.
multiple times, even for the KGRA audience, because I know a lot of them may not have heard it, and I've talked about this like repeatedly, and then this is another thing I got a strike for on YouTube, because I did a whole video where I played that interview with Aaron Russo, and then I showed how they're talking about they want it during the whole COVID passport and vaccine passport thing that they had going on, where you they had talked about, well, I mean, people were like, well, what are you going to give me, a book, like a passport style book? And they were like, no, it'd be a digital one. And they were like, well, we could put it on your phone, or there was talk of even getting people to put chips in their hands, the
Mhm.
Verichip in
Right.
their hands, and they could link the passport to it. And then in every article that I saw pushing it, it was like, well, it's really good because not only can you get it put in you, but you could link your vaccine passport to it, but you can link your bank information. You could link, your entire medical history, all your financial history, all your transactions, everything to it. You could. Some people are even linking their front doors to it, and
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
literally what he talked about in 2008, shortly before he died of cancer, where he said, look, Nick Rockefeller told me that the ultimate goal, when he asked him, he said, well, what's your ultimate goal? Because he was telling him about, 9/11 and everything else before it happened. And he said, the ultimate goal is to get everybody chipped and
Right.
then attach everything to those chips. And then if you're a bad citizen, we can just turn off your chip. It's literally what, these ESG scores, it's
That's
literally the
right.
same thing. They
Mhm.
will eventually not they're not going to connect it to your phone. The phone is the in between. It's to get you used to having everything linked in one place. And then eventually they'll just, I mean, they already have nightclubs that have done this as a promotional thing. Get the chip and you can get in the front door. They're going to put, all they need to do is put card readers on the door, like RFID readers on the doors, and then you have to swipe your hand on this reader, and if you don't swipe your hand, if it doesn't pass either one, you're not going to get in. So you could be like, well, I have my chip but I refuse to swipe my hand. Well, it looks like you're not going to get into your house. Imagine being able to take away food, shelter, financial stability, all of those things away from people at a whim. If you say something that they don't like, China's already practicing that kind of behavior now. And we've had US politicians, including Biden, okay, in the past, has praised China and their practices and the way that they do things.
Mhm.
So just,
Yeah.
it's real. It's not fake. It's real. Unfortunately, I mean, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but yes, they actually do want to chip people. You know, the strike I got for it was medical misinformation, and I was like,
Right.
how's it medical
Yeah.
misinformation? Here's them talking about, like, promoting literally what I'm talking about and what Aaron Russo warned about in 2008, and YouTube was like, no, it's disinfo. Okay, even though they're mainstream resources, these were mainstream articles. So don't believe your own lying eyes. Believe what YouTube tells you, because they're now the arbiters of truth. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Believe what you see with your own eyes, ladies and gentlemen, because the weird stuff actually is happening, even though we kind of do live in the upside down. Steve, we got about a minute and a half left. Shamelessly plug your Substack.
Oh, yeah. People can go to my Substack if they'd like, stevestars.substack.com. And there's a really good website that's out there. A good friend of mine, his name is Craig James. It's got that you'd like. It's called uh, justinformedtalk.com. Justinformedtalk.com. You got to check this out because he's got some great stuff up there, great analysis and everything like that. I'm going to get Popeye hooked up with him and we're going to be working together in the future. So stevestars.substack and justinformedtalk.com. Popeye.com. And both really good websites. And probably, what about yours, though, Popeye? Let's get your website and everything out there real quick.
Yeah, we got time. I just wanted to make sure you had time to shamelessly plug your Substack.
I did shamelessly plug.
Good. Go to Steve's Substack, and I want people to sign up and show Steve some love. He does a lot of work over there.
Yeah.
Right, but they can subscribe to it. They can subscribe to your stuff over there. So follow Steve. He's a great guy. I love having him on as a co-host. Steve, thank you so much for coming on.
Once again, my pleasure. Yeah. Thanks to Bill and the whole network. Yeah.
Yep, ladies and gentlemen, you can follow me over at Rabbit Hole Radio on Rumble. Follow my channel there. Listen to me here on KGRA, and of course over on Twitter, RHR Popeye. And with that, I am going to leave you with my favorite quote from Martin Luther King Jr., because I hate to leave things on such a negative note. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I love you all. I know Steve does, and we will catch you all again live next week. I'm out of here.
All right.